So Neil Ferguson, he's incredibly stupid. But what is interesting for us in our research is to isolate the factor that he's the radically efficacious factor that's causing, as it were, allowing for the radical criticism of the notion of cause. Um, Hume, the Atia already, and Aristotle, um, this strange analytic philosophy notion of clearing our thoughts and so thereby clearing our actions in the mathematician who died young, Frank Ramsey, but also in others like he who quotes him, A.J. Ayer, and others, Godfrey Vasey. This whole notion of I think maybe Godfrey Vasey less. I like him better than the other analytics. Not that I didn't have a thorough knowing of all these people, and today they're numbering many tens of thousands. But the main ones at the beginning, who set the nature, if you like, the pattern of analytic philosophy and its essencing, or in its holding sway, and its wielding, this in its aspects of casting inspiration on its acolytes, if you like. It produces this mystical notion of the clarity itself, something explanatory or clarifying in itself, which might go beyond empirical reports, and then says this is what philosophy is all about. And then it includes, for instance, distinguishing between nonsense and sense as part of the clarification or explanatory power of this sort of vision, this revelation of the philosophers. So analytic philosophy also has this very strange notion. It just it latches onto it in a different way, I think, and has different commitments than philosophy proper, than Heidegger. It's one of the forms of non-Heideggerian philosophy. So let's get back to this question of what's the factor that Neil Ferguson, it's unfortunate, I mean, he's has some connection to the Scottish Enlightenment is very interesting. It's independent of the other forces of the major universities in Prussia and in the German-speaking universities, and different from Oxford and Cambridge. I mean, speaking of the 19th century and earlier, and going back to Hume. There's something to this sort of using that tradition is still alive. But in any case, he doesn't use that tradition. He just superficially makes this kind of judgment that amounts to this. He totally ignores that, as Ivan Illich is saying, today we're in the midst of this moment of the industrial age coming to an end, and the accelerationist or technological essence coming to power, as we see constantly in the talk of hybridity, in the movement of elections by deep fakes, by manipulation on the social media, in the rise of AI as the so-called hybridity, whereby Russia, and probably vice versa, and actually I should say, because the it's sort of like because or not even sort of like, I guess the Western Bloc had um, uh, the first mover advantage, and it seized upon the Russian assets. But then the so-called hybrid warfare, a lot of that it could be attacks on financial centers and attacks on other things, strange combination really of different kinds of electronic attacks, which then cause people like uh, Merz in Germany to take to the hilt the Habermas is saying of that we're in this red line dilemma, which is to say the so-called liberal democratic way of life, which largely coincides with the attitude of no draft and no that the people don't think of themselves as having any realistic chance of being mobilized to war. The liberal democratic way of life, that it's at stake, but that means exactly that. It has to reverse itself back into the old way, but it can't do that neatly. It necessarily leads to some kind of dialectic, some kind of friction arises from that. You can't just go back to the earlier state where the population was more like it is in Russia, where the population is ready to fight for the country, where there's a more patriotic sentiment in that way, which could also be construed negatively as chauvinistic sentiment. But the main thing here in the Niall Ferguson view is he totally ignores the change from the industrial to the technological age. And then he says, Trump is to be explained simply by saying he's sort of a flim-flam man who happens to play on the, with n number of complications, the American populist thing. But what does it totally ignore? So it ignores that there is an analogy, although he claims there's not, on both ancient Rome, Caesar to Augustus. So of course it's not really Caesar to Augustus, it's Caesar after the Civil War, after the death of Pompey the Great and so on, has come into this special situation. Let's let Biden be Pompey the Great. I don't care. That seems wrong. It's somehow that Biden was the last of the great warlords of the sort of with Bolton as at his side of the Western Alliance. The great warlords of the Western Alliance taken in the Atlantic Council, in the Atlanticist, in the Primacist sense, are no more. They've ended. So Pompey the Great is dead. And the real distinction is not as Ferguson thinks. So he's thinking, it's not like a situation with Caesar to Augustus. But no, the real change has already happened. This is what's registered by Kagan. This is what's registered by Fukuyama. This is what's registered by those who say the allies, all the allies, the NATO allies, are now sort of no longer real allies. And the main foes, the ones that were listed first by Obama, but then carried on by Biden in the security statement under Obama, was the beginning of the practice to say these are our main rivals, Russia and China. But now it's been flipped around. So this great event has already happened. Russia and China have already come into a totally different um, multipolar alignment vis-a-vis um, American policy. So it doesn't mean there's not the, on analogy with Nixon, the madman Donald Trump, and that Russia can really trust Trump, or that China could trust Trump. But it's just that there's no longer the Western alliance unipolar, come join the club, history is ended attitude. And therefore there's a totally different situation. So just as there's a totally different situation after Pompey the Great was defeated, after Caesar comes to power. Now in the ashes of this, something happens, right? And the empire crops up. But what are we dealing with today? One, the political situation as just mentioned, but two, there's a second factor, which is similar then to the 1930s, which is in the 1930s, the issue came to a head around communism, and communism is basically a factor which is comparable to the move from industrial to post-industrial society, in which the old rural society, based on most of the population being involved in agriculture, was absolutely over with. And in Germany, there was just the late waves. They got late the wave of the first type of Dickensian type of industry, but something new, the corporatist type of way of doing things was coming into, which relied more on real estate, which relied more on global finance, was coming into being in the 30s. So as instanced by the fact that long before Nixon in the 70s, but that we had this deep coupling from gold, and these monetary policies already in the World War I era, which affected, or sometimes later, but in any case, somewhere between the wars, which affected Japan. And then Japan thought, look how unstable, there were things that happened, if that's not exactly right, but in any case, there were things that happened that made Japan think, we can't trust the pound sterling anymore. It's not so stable. Therefore, all our global financial dealings, we have to sort of secure, we the wealthy, we the pure school goers, like Yoko Ono was a pure school goer. We have to get some real stuff to secure our position, and therefore we have to go into China. Things were happening that were due to the arising of the what Wallerstein calls the global system in its current sense. This total activation of the invisible hand, this total activation, which at length leads into the Zygmunt Bauman liquidity, that nobody can say who's controlling what. This was opening up, but this is not an accelerationist effect in the sense of that AI is. It is in some way in a Heideggerian sense, in that all attempts to let things be handled by quantity, therefore by money, and by efficiency understood in terms of sort of the value in money of goods produced, has a kind of, we can count on this feeling. It has a kind of attempt to make everything calculable, which has to do with the technological essence and the way our current Dasein largely thinks about things. In any case, there was like big changeovers being affected, which have nothing to do with the specific leader, right? So, yeah, I would say Neil Ferguson is simply wrong when he says the analogies on Rome and on, although of course it's abused and so on, the ad hit theorem stuff, are nonetheless, they have some explanatory power because they deal with these other major, if you like, structural changes. But in the case of the technological essence, it's something deeper. It's something in, if we're dealing in analytic philosophy, it's like our primary way of clearing our actions to define it as clearing our actions to so as to clear our the other way around, clearing our explanations so as to clear our actions, to self-edify ourselves in a way that covers our moral and spiritual existence. So here I'll just leave off and say, already Heidegger was talking about listening to this this poem, this libation of being, and it's very difficult to see the way this Heidegger wants to so-called negotiate an existence with this acceleration, with this direction of all money, from one point of view, the direction of all money into the tech sector. It would be so-called misdirected, cause bubbles, bubble up elsewhere, destroy things, if it didn't go into the tech sector. The tech sector is, the AI sector is deemed as the right place for the direction of money. Heidegger is trying to appraise this not only from within, as Dugan put in a recent post, it's like not only from within the horizon of this. This isn't the exact language Dugan used, but he's basically saying, if you'll just look at it from the horizon of economic theory of the market fundamentalism, saying this is what will cause money to be best directed, then you don't quite get there. You have to take this up more deeply, allow the inverted dark moment, and therefore do something. You have to let your missiles fire more philosophically. You can't, it's not going to help to pretend that one figure, Trump, one leader, is everything. If you try to look at it that way, as Ferguson is doing, then you misread the gravity of the situation. You misread the change that's happening, but also the most important thing is the chance to engage with this, as it were, fast time, with this butter that's been melted now and can be spread, this ghee.